He was standing at my mother's kitchen island in a bathrobe at 2 in the afternoon, eating her yogurt straight from the container. And the first thing he said to me was, "You're finally here. Good, the gutters need cleaning." I had driven 11 hours from CFB Esquimat. I hadn't slept. I had a duffel bag over one shoulder and a Tim Hortons cup that had gone cold somewhere around Hope, BC. And this stranger my mother had been seeing for 8 months, looked at me like I was the hired help who'd shown up late. I set my bat down on the floor. Slowly. "Excuse me." "The gutters," he said again, pointing toward the ceiling as though I didn't understand a word. "They're clogged. Your mother mentioned you were handy?" His name was Warren. He was 54 years old, recently retired from a mid-level position at a pipeline company in Alberta. And he had moved into my mother's house in Kelowna 3 months after they started dating. He had not been asked. He had simply arrived with boxes and a recliner and opinions about everything. My mother came in from the back garden with dirt on her gloves and apologized with her eyes before she even opened her mouth. That particular look she had, equal parts embarrassed and exhausted, I had seen it before when I was 16. And things were bad in a different way. I didn't like seeing it again. "Nora," she said, and she hugged me tight, and I could feel how thin she'd gotten. "I'm so glad you're home." Warren went back to the yogurt. "I want to be honest about something, because it matters for understanding everything that comes after. I did not say anything that afternoon. Not when he changed the channel while my mother was watching something. Not when he complained about the roast she'd made. Said it was dry. Said she'd overcooked it. Pushed the plate toward the center of the table like a verdict. Not when he told me at 9 o'clock at night that the guest room was technically being used for storage now, so I'd be sleeping on the pullout in the basement. My mother's house. The house she'd owned outright since 2019, the mortgage paid off with her own pension contributions and 26 years of teaching elementary school in the same district. The house where I grew up. And I was on the pullout. I didn't say anything because I needed to understand what I was dealing with first. That's something the military teaches you whether you want to learn it or not. Assess before you engage. Know the terrain. So I watched. Warren, I learned quickly, operated on a very specific theory of the household. He believed sincerely, it seemed, that because he was the only man present, authority followed automatically. He didn't contribute to the mortgage because there wasn't one. He didn't contribute much to groceries either. I found the receipts my mother kept in the junk drawer and did the math. He cooked twice in 3 months and both times presented it as a significant event. He had, in those same 3 months, purchased a new set of golf clubs on my mother's visa, citing something about household morale. He talked about his years at the pipeline company the way some people talk about military service, with a reverence for rank and structure that he clearly believed translated universally. He called himself a logistics commander. His actual title, from what I could find, had been senior operations coordinator. He was not, in any recognizable sense, a bad-looking man. He was tall, kept himself in reasonable shape, had the kind of loud confidence that reads as competence to people who haven't learned to tell the difference. My mother, I think, had been lonely. I understood that. I didn't blame her for it. I blamed him for what he did with it. The first week I was home was my leave. 10 days I'd been saving since the spring. I spent it quietly. I helped my mother in the garden. I drove her to her Tuesday appointment without asking why she needed one. I fixed the gutters because they actually did need it and because I needed something to do with my hands. I watched Warren eat her food and use her car and speak to her in that particular tone men like him use, the one that's technically not yelling but carries the same charge. On the 4th day, he came into the kitchen while I was making breakfast and said, "You're still here." "I'm on leave," I said. "Right." He poured himself coffee from the pot I'd made. "And after that, back to your base." "Yes." He nodded slowly, like he was processing complex information. "Because your mother and I have been talking about some changes to the house. Renovations, the basement especially." He looked at me steadily. "It would be useful to know the timeline." "The basement where I was sleeping?" "I'll be gone in 6 days," I said. "Great," he said, and he took his coffee and left. That evening, I called my friend Priya from the back porch. Keeping my voice low, Priya had known me since our first posting and had the particular gift of listening without making you feel pitied. I told her what was happening. She was quiet for a moment. "How's your mom actually doing?" she asked. "She seems smaller," I said, "like she's taking up less space than she used to." Priya didn't say anything for a second. "Then you know you can't just leave." "I know." "What are you going to do?" I looked out at the yard, at my mother's garden, which she'd spent years building, the raised beds and the apple tree she'd planted when I was 7. "I'm going to handle it," I said, "properly." What does properly mean? It means he's not going to see it coming. Here is what Warren did not know about me, because he had never asked, not once in a week, and my mother, God bless her, had not volunteered it. He saw a woman in her early 30s who drove a practical car and wore her hair in a low ponytail and said, "Excuse me," and "Thank you," and did not make scenes. He saw someone manageable. He did not know that I was a captain in the Royal Canadian Air Force. He did not know that I had been flying CH-148 Cyclones off the West Coast for 6 years, or that I had a commendation sitting in a frame in my apartment at the base, or that my commanding officer had, 3 weeks prior, put my name forward for promotion to major. He did not know any of this because he had never asked me a single question about my life. On the 6th day, my second to last day of leave, Warren came home in the early afternoon from golf. My mother was at her friend Carol's house. I was in the kitchen. He came in, dropped his keys on the counter, opened the fridge, stared into it for a long moment, and then turned to me. "There's no beer," he said. "No," I agreed. "Your mother was supposed to pick some up." "She's at Carol's." He made a sound that wasn't quite a sigh and wasn't quite a grunt. He looked at me. "You could go." I looked back at him. "I could," I said. "I'm not going to." Something shifted in his face. He'd been fine with me, or rather, fine with his idea of me up to that point. Manageable. Quiet. Someone who cleaned gutters and slept in the basement and left in 6 days. My refusal disrupted something in his model of how this household worked. "I'm just saying," he started. "I know what you're saying," I said. "The answer is no." He set his golf bag down heavily. The sound it made on the kitchen floor was meant to be significant. "You know," he said, and his voice had taken on a new quality, the one I'd been waiting for. Lower, slower, with that particular edge that men like him use when they want you to understand something about power. "Your mother and I have talked about this house, about the future, and you being here every few months disrupting the routine." "She owns this house," I said. "We're partners." "She owns this house," I said again. "Her name. Her name, her deed, her mortgage-free title." He looked at me like I'd said something mildly offensive at a dinner party. "That's a very cold way to look at a relationship." "I'm asking you directly," I said, and I kept my voice completely level. "Are you on the title?" He didn't answer. "Are you contributing to property tax, to utilities, to the insurance?" Still nothing. "Okay," I said. "Then I want to be clear about something. This is my mother's home. You are a guest in it, and the way you speak to her and to me is going to change." He actually laughed. It was short and a little surprised and entirely dismissive. "You're going to tell me how things work in this house?" "Yes." "You're here for 10 days. You live on a base in Victoria. You have no idea." "I live on a base," I said, "because I'm a captain in the Royal Canadian Air Force. I've been flying maritime helicopters for 6 years. I outrank half the people you've ever heard of in any organizational structure you've ever worked in, and I have had this exact conversation with people who had considerably more authority than you, and it went the same way every time." I paused. "You are not running this house. You are not a partner in this house, and you are not going to speak to my mother the way you have been speaking to her." The laugh was gone. He stood there in his golf clothes, and for a moment I could see him cycling through responses. The dismissal, the counter-argument, the appeal to some imagined masculine authority. and watching each one fail before he could use it. She hasn't complained, he said finally. His voice was quieter. She doesn't complain, I said. That's not the same thing as being fine. My mother came home 40 minutes later to find Warren in the living room, unusually quiet, and me making tea. She looked between us with the careful attention of someone who has learned to read rooms quickly. Everything okay? She said. We had a conversation. I said, it went well. Warren said nothing. I left the next morning as planned. I hugged my mother in the driveway for a long time. She smelled like her garden and the soap she'd used my whole life, and I did not want to let go. You don't have to stay with him, I said quietly into her shoulder. I know, she said. I mean it. I know you do. If you want to talk to someone about options. Nora. She pulled back and looked at me. Her eyes were clear. I heard you two yesterday. I waited. I didn't say anything, she said, because I wanted to see what he'd do. She squeezed my hands. And now I know. I drove back to Victoria. 11 hours, the mountains going golden in the September light, the radio on low. My phone buzzed somewhere past Merit. My mother. He's packing up the recliner, she wrote. Said he needs some space to think. I told him to take his time. I changed the Wi-Fi password. I laughed out loud alone in the car somewhere in the Fraser Canyon. She texted again 20 minutes later. Carol's coming over for dinner. I'm making the roast properly this time. 3 weeks after I got back to base, my promotion came through. Major. I called my mother first. I knew before they did, she said. You did not. I absolutely did. I've known since you were 9 and you organized your entire class's book fair by genre and then by author surname. I was on the base steps in the October cold, laughing, and a couple of guys from my squadron walked past and gave me a look. He's gone? I asked. Completely, she said. I had the locks changed just to be thorough. The locksmith was very professional about the whole thing. Good. I also found the visa statement, she said. I've called the bank. They were quite helpful. Mom, I'm 71, she said, not 17. I know how to handle a situation once I've decided to handle it. I just needed to decide. I sat on the steps for a while after we hung up, looking out at the base, at the helicopters on the tarmac, at the flat grey sky over the street. There's a particular kind of quiet that comes after something resolves. Not silence exactly, but absence of something that had been loud for a long time. I recognized it. She sent me a photo that evening. The kitchen, clean and bright. Carol visible at the table with a glass of wine. My mother's garden through the window, still green in the late fall. No golf bag by the door. No recliner in the corner. Just her house, looking like her house again. I pinned it to the little board above my desk at the base. It's still there. I look at it sometimes, when I get in early, before the day starts. That rectangle of kitchen light, ordinary and entirely hers, and I think about the difference between someone who takes up space and someone who has actually earned the right to be somewhere. Warren never learned my rank. I never told him. I didn't need to. The point was never the rank. The point was that my mother deserved to take up her full space again. And she did. That photo is still pinned above my desk. I look at it on early mornings when the base is quiet and the light over the street is just starting to come in. My mother's kitchen, ordinary and bright, Carol at the table, the garden through the window, no golf bag, no recliner, just her house, looking like hers again. I've thought a lot about what actually happened that week in Kelowna. Not the conversation with Warren, that part was straightforward enough. I mean what happened underneath it. The thing that made the difference between my mother shrinking further into herself and my mother changing the Wi-Fi password and calling the bank on her own terms. Warren wasn't an unusual person. That's the part people sometimes miss. He wasn't a monster. He was just a man who had learned, somewhere along the way, that if you walk into a space with enough certainty, people will hand it to you. And he was right for a while. Confidence without substance works until someone decides to look closely. The problem was that no one around him had decided to look closely, not because they couldn't see, but because they hadn't yet chosen to act on what they saw. My mother saw. She told me as much, standing in the driveway the morning I left. She'd been watching, deciding, waiting to know what she was truly dealing with. That clarity. The willingness to observe honestly before acting. To not let discomfort rush you into either confrontation or surrender. That's something I watched her practice my entire life, and I think I only recognized it for what it was that morning. I didn't handle things well because I outranked Warren. I handled things because I had spent years learning what it actually costs to hold a position, not the title, but the weight of being responsible for people who depend on you to stay steady. That kind of accountability changes how you carry yourself. It makes you slower to perform and harder to rattle. Warren mistook my quietness for weakness the same way he mistook his loudness for authority. He got both things wrong. What I keep coming back to is this: the outcomes in our lives tend to follow the choices we make when no one is watching and nothing is forcing our hand. My mother could have said nothing to Warren for another year. I could have cleaned the gutters, slept on the pullout, and driven back to Victoria with my door clamped shut. We both had reasons not to act. Easier, in the short term, not to. But there's a cost to that kind of silence. Not the strategic silence my mother used while she was still deciding, but the other kind, the kind that comes from believing it's not your place to take up space. That cost compounds. You pay it slowly, in small daily surrenders, until one day you look around and realize you've rented out most of yourself to someone who never deserved even a room. My mother is 71 years old. She paid off that house with 26 years of teaching other people's children to read. She planted that apple tree when I was 7. She earned every square foot of that life. And she deserved to move through it without making herself smaller to accommodate someone else's need to feel large. I think about the people I've served with, the ones who held under pressure and the ones who didn't. And the difference was never rank or experience or even courage in the dramatic sense. It was whether they had decided, quietly and in advance, what they actually stood for. That decision, made before the moment arrives, is what lets you act with clarity when the moment does. Warren is gone. My mother's fine, I made major, and I still look at that photo every morning. That rectangle of kitchen light, and think about what it means to finally take up exactly the space you've earned.